And good morning, everyone. Pastor Paul here. Happy Saturday for Pastor Paul's Bible Talk on a somber Saturday when we remember one of the most startling days in American history, 9/11. And we'll talk about that and also this topic of believing in a bigger God. Welcome to Pastor Paul's Bible Talk. I'm glad you're with me today. I'm Paul, otherwise known as Pastor Paul on TikTok and social media, and I'm so glad to be with you today. And oh man, do I have a hair issue going here. But I'm so glad to be with you on this amazing Saturday, a somber day where we remember one of the most startling and stunning days in American history when, do you remember where you were when all of a sudden somebody gave you a call or a text, or you saw it on social media, maybe in the infancy of social media days, and somebody says, man, a plane has flown into a building in New York City. And then it happened again, and we knew our lives would be changed forever by terrorism in America, and in some ways changed for maybe in some good ways, and some ways in very, very, very not good ways. We're going to talk about that and more on my series. I'm talking about, what does salvation look like in this season? Does it look like what evangelicals have been telling us for so long? Or maybe is there another way to look at God's sozo for humanity? And so we'll talk about that today. And just let me join my spirit to you. Just celebrate that we're together here today. This is for those of you who may have lost your religious community. It's our sermon for the week in this unconventional spiritual life that we're pursuing, and we call it Pastor Paul's Bible Talk. And so I just celebrate that I'm here joined with you today. Isn't that good? And I am glad to be here with you today. And I'm getting funky today. I've got a second camera set up so you can see a cutaway every once in a while and not just have to look at my silly face. And so hope you enjoy a little bit of that technology added to our day. So bless this word to us today, God. My theory today and my postulation I will send out to you is we need a bigger God amongst Christians today. And my theory goes back to this: as we look at the Old Testament and try to figure out, as we look at the Judeo-Christian Bible, what does salvation look like? Now, salvation is this thing we've been told, many of us as evangelicals, is you pray a sinner's prayer, you adopt the religion of Christianity, and now you're going to go to heaven. And you know what? You should act better. You should treat people better because Jesus did this for you. But it doesn't really matter because you prayed that prayer. You're a part of the Christian religion. And so you're in. You get to go to heaven, and all of those people are out. And that's what grace has become. And I think that comes somewhat out of our history of human beings in dealing with God and religion. And we go back to Mount Sinai in the Old Testament. And when I read that story where the 10 commandments were given to the Israelites, that God is saying to those people in that story of the Bible, to the Hebrew Israelite Jewish people who had come out of Egypt, and he's saying, okay, now we're going to be in partnership together, just like I was with your father Abraham. As I was with one guy there, I'm going to be with a whole group of people now, so people can see that partnership with heaven looks very different than what you've known it to be. And we're going to be partners, and you're going to be my priest to the whole world. Isn't that amazing? And the Israelite people were like, nah. And they said what they said in essence, why, and they talked about God being a fearful God, and they thought, this is awesome. We've got the biggest God of all the gods of all of the people around us. And they said, we don't want to be in partnership and be priest to the world God. What we want is a God like our neighbors have, that when they do things for it, when they sacrifice to that God, when they pray just the right way, when they say just the right sinner's prayer, you will then perform for us as we want you to do. Their gods, when they sacrifice their children to them, will kill their enemies, help them win wars, help their crops grow if they do just the right dance. And we want a God like that. And since you're really big and scary, we don't want to be your priest for you to the world. You just talk to Moses. You tell him what we're supposed to do and we'll do it. And God said, that's not really my plan for the world. I want you to be priest to the world, and I want my goodness to be on display to the world. And the Israelites were like, no, thanks. No, thanks. We want a God like they have, one that hates the people we hate, one that will kill the people we want that God to kill. And if we do just the right sacrifice and just the right dramatic things, then we want you to perform for us as God. And God said, okay, if that's what you want, here's 600 rules. And I'm going to show you what a terrible idea that is and how you can never live up to these rules. God never wanted that. And we see that in the story of Jonah, where Jonah thought God being God and being the God of Israel meant that God would kill their enemies. And so he wanted the Ninevites to be dead. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he's like, but I know you're a gracious God. And if I go preach to those guys, you're telling me to preach because they are having a heart change. And you're going to have mercy. And God, I don't want you to have mercy. I want you to kill my enemies. God, I want you to let us win the abortion battle in the United States so we can impose our rules on people and claim it's about babies with you. But actually, we just want a God that hates the people we hate, that wants to let us win the battles we're going to win, wants to give us power and comfort. And that's the God we want. And that was the God of the Israelites in the Old Testament and the God of evangelicalism today. And so when we look at 9/11, and by the way, what amazing stories. I've watched a lot of the specials this week. And, just heroic, amazing things done in the middle of all of that. The people that maybe saved a plane from flying into the Capitol or the White House on Flight 93 and forcing that plane down in Pennsylvania and giving their lives. And the firemen that ran upstairs when everybody else was running down. And we've heard those stories. It was amazing. And so I don't want to minimize any of that. Or people lost family members that day, and 3,000 of them. And it was tragic. But because I would say we have been worshiping a smaller God than the true God of heaven for a long time, like Jonah, like the other people in the Bible, like the Israelites, we wanted our enemies to be killed. And we said, God, would you go take care of our enemies for us? And I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong that we want to defend ourselves, but let's use it as a chance on this 20th reunion to check our hearts. Did we want God to kill our enemies for us? Did we want to win battles and show how powerful we were? And so we ended up going into 2 wars after 9/11 when maybe that wasn't the best choice. We know for sure that one of those wars, we went in under unjust pretenses of weapons of mass destruction. And truly, guys, I'm saying, because we just wanted somebody to beat up after 9/11. And so we've killed, by estimates, as many as 300,000 innocent Iraqi civilians to overturn a dictator that we put into power in the first place. And that war has drained us. And we still have soldiers in Iraq. And we're still trying to get the situation under control there, and still trying to keep the peace that was disrupted by us going in to fight an unjust war in Iraq. And we went into Afghanistan, and maybe you can make a better case that Afghanistan was a place to go. But what has happened 20 years later? Afghanistan is right back where it started from when we went in there. And we've had this disruption of leaving, and we're arguing. And I'm not talking about should we or shouldn't we. I believe we should have gotten out of Afghanistan years and years and years ago. But presidents didn't have the political will to do it, and were afraid to. And so now we're in this mess of pulling out of there in this really awkward way. And do we see how Afghanistan and Iraq and our heart and our need for revenge and military conquest? I even had a pastor friend recently tell me, he's like, we had to do something or else people would start to think it was okay to fly into buildings in America all of the time. But maybe that's a perspective that comes out of our heart's desire from the very first day of America. We want a war to gain our independence, and we want a war to make the country stay together, and we want a war to stop the spread of something evil in Europe. And I'm not saying any of those things were necessarily wrong, but isn't our history as a country built around the wars that we've won? And because of that, we have felt that our military would always be blessed by God and could always set things right. And we found out differently, didn't we? In Korea, in Vietnam, we should have learned our lessons, shouldn't we? But instead, we felt our military could fix it after this scary moment of 9/11. And did we miss that in Matthew 26, Jesus said to Peter, when Peter jumped up to defend Jesus and cut off an ear, that Jesus said in Matthew 26:52, put your sword back in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. He said, Peter, I love your zeal, but do you think you're going to save us from this Roman army with the sword? No, you're going to die. If the sword becomes your protection rather than partnership with heaven, it's not going to work. And we say today, oh, well, we had to attack somebody because otherwise anybody would think they could fly into any of our buildings. But we've missed that in the Bible, the goal of heaven is not to defeat your enemies. That was the goal of human beings, not the goal of God. God didn't call for genocide of other people in the Bible, even though it may look like it in the Old Testament, but that was truly human beings blaming their malevolent acts on God. And isn't it true that every war today fought in the world since World War II, even before perhaps, has been 2 wars fought by people who believed God was on their side in the war, who declared, we have God, so we cannot lose. And hasn't it proven for us as Americans that always proclaiming God is behind us, what we do militarily, no matter what, hasn't quite worked out? And we've missed that the goal of heaven is to be able to beat our swords into plowshares. That instead of needing weapons to protect ourselves, we're able to put our resources into producing fruit for our labors. And wouldn't that be better? The United States of America spends almost $600 billion a year, and that shot up precipitously under the Trump administration and never seems to quite go down too much under Democratic administrations. We spend more, and I haven't checked the facts on this, but this used to be for sure true, that we spent more on military than the next 23 largest militaries in the world, or maybe that was navies. We spend an astronomical amount of money, far more than the next many countries on the list, most of whom are our allies, not our enemies. Our resources have been drained by 20 years in Afghanistan. Not only our money resources, but our human resources of our young people who have been damaged inextricably by being sent off to war, many of them, and 2 generations growing up that have never known a day when we weren't at war. My son, being born in 2003, has never lived a day on this planet when the United States was not at war. What does that do to our soul and our psyche when in Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 through 40, Jesus said, you've heard it said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, quoting an Old Testament passage. And he says, but no, that's not ever what God wanted. He says, I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn then the other cheek to them. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. And that's a modernized translation. But what he was saying, and I've heard some people use this idea of turning the other cheek to be like this rebellious thing, that to get a slap on the cheek was to be backhanded by a right-hander, because everybody was right-handed. To be left-handed was evil. And so everybody used their right hand. It was to be slapped. And then to turn the other cheek meant that they couldn't come and slap you the other direction, that this was somehow a defiant act to turn the other cheek because they wouldn't be able to backhand you again. And I do not believe that is an appropriate translation of the story. I think Jesus is 100% saying here, if somebody slaps you on the one cheek and tries to humiliate you, you offer them the other cheek to show that you're not a victim to what they're trying to do. And how do I know that? Because then he comes to this other part of the passage and says, and if they sue you for your tunic, for your cloak, give them your tunic as well. What does that mean? That meant like it was a law that you could sue a man who owed you money and you could take his outer garment, but it was against the law for you to take the inner garment, because the idea was if a man lost his tunic, he would freeze to death and die. And Jesus is giving the picture here of, if you are unjustly sued for your outer garment, give them your inner garment as well. And the stripping of your clothes and standing naked in the street and saying, I refuse to become victimized by this unjustly treatment. And I'll even stand here naked, and my nakedness will prove the malfeasance of my creditor. And it will change the hearts of people toward that creditor around me, and ultimately change the heart of my creditor as well. That they will be changed by my power and refusal to be a victim, rather than to claim this victim status and try to find a way to get back at them. It's real power to say, I will not be a victim. I'll turn the other cheek. If you hit me on one cheek, I'll give you the other. And if you sue me for the cloak, I'll give you my tunic too, because I am not a victim. Jesus was saying that's real power, to say, I'm going to prove you unjust, rather than try to come at you with my own form of injustice and place that bondage of it on you. Do you get what I'm saying? Being a victim and lashing out after 9/11 wasn't God's plan. That doesn't mean we couldn't seek out the people who perpetrated the act or who funded it. And in fact, none of them were in Iraq. We just went there to beat the crap out of somebody so we could feel better about ourselves and get cheaper oil for ourselves and enrich some American companies tremendously. And many of the people behind it weren't in Afghanistan, but were rather in Saudi Arabia. But we can't do anything about Saudi Arabia because we need them as our ally to keep our oil price low. So we just found some people that we could extract revenge on and make ourselves feel less victimized. And we could create victims out of somebody else. And are we safer in the Middle East today after 9/11? Do we feel like the Middle East is more under control? Let me give you an example of how this works, that not being a victim is more powerful than being victimized and lashing out. And I did it in a TikTok video this week, and I want to show that to you now, as to show you how the power of service and self-sacrificial living can be more powerful than trying to lash out at somebody. So let me show that to you now, if I can figure out how to use my technology here, through a TikTok video I did this week. And by the way, look at this. This is really cool. I went over 84,000 followers on TikTok this week and 1 million likes. I don't know. There's just something cool about having 1 million likes now. But this is a TikTok video that I call Christians, is it actually about saving babies or not? And so let me get to that video. There it is right there.
Abortion, red,
here we go.
Christians, if your angry, partisan, anti-abortion rhetoric is really about saving babies, let me tell you the story of Christians who really did save the lives of babies. They didn't do it by wanting nutball, incompetent people as their government officials, nor did they do it by putting on hats and chanting, "Make Rome great again." In the first century, Roman households would utilize the barbaric practice of exposure. If a father didn't like a baby for any reason, mothers had no say in the deal because, like Christianity today, women were considered second-class citizens. They would simply leave the infant on the side of the road or on the local dump heap. The exposure to elements or animals would end the baby's life, or somebody would pick up the baby to make it a slave in their household. But Christians ultimately stopped the practice. How did they do it? By going to the dump heap and screaming like this? No, they did it looking like this. History tells us Christians would go out every day and collect the babies left to die. Now, these were Christians with very little resource because they were truly under oppression. Not oppression like Christians scream about today when their favorite sushi restaurant is overbooked. But these acts of self-sacrificing by Christians changed the heart of the culture towards the practice, and it began to cease and was made illegal in 374 AD. For decades now, American Christians have become Republican, acted like assholes, voted amoral, incompetent people into office, and screamed at women as they made devastatingly difficult decisions. Yet one could argue not a single baby has been saved. But you have chased away 2 generations from the church and put our democracy at risk. Could it be that if Christians showed as much caring towards living people as they do for the unborn, something could change? Wouldn't our service speak more powerfully than our venom? And doesn't that reflect the Christ you claim to follow? Because right now, nobody's buying the bullshit. If it's really about babies, it should look less like this and more like this. So please do that and stop bastardizing the gospel and embarrassing the rest of us. Christians, if you're angry...
So there it is. How about that? It was the service of very poor Christians that went out and collected the babies and took care of them that changed the heart of the culture, not imposing the bondage of law like we want to do with the abortion law, not like imposing our military power on other people like we love to do, to be enamored with our military as a fix-all. Maybe if we would change the perspective to say, let's serve instead of impose ourselves, something could change in the world. We could better partner with a heavenly God rather than be the one to kill our enemies. What do you think? Possible? Or am I just a pie in the sky optimist who believes something crazy? I don't know. We've never tried following the way of Jesus. We've only tried imposing our will on people. And I just postulate to you, how has that worked out for us so far? Do we believe in a God that's big enough? Talk more about that after this. Join the Pastor Paul NPE Patreon community because it's where all the nonpartisan deconstructing interaction happens. On the NPE Patreon page with Pastor Paul, you get special regular e-inspired content that you can't get anywhere else. You get access to our podcast guests that aren't available to the public. There are special Zoom sessions with Ashley and me and previews to what's coming next in the Pastor Paul world. You're invited into the private NPE Facebook discussion group, and there's access to the audiobook version of Paul's novel, Joseph Comes to Town, which isn't available anywhere else in the entire world. And at higher levels of commitment, we can have one-on-one visits together or even coaching from my Pastor Paul coaching curriculum. The number one reason, though, to join the NPE Patreon community with Pastor Paul, to help promote this message, my message, that God is not mad at the world. Your subscription helps fund the Pastor Paul work so we can bring this message to everyone, everywhere. So help support the Pastor Paul Nonpartisan Evangelical Patreon community. Join the Pastor Paul NPE Patreon page and enjoy the benefits of your subscription today. And help me, Pastor Paul, share with those who have lost their faith community and need to know that God is not mad at them. Go to our website on Patreon at patreon.com/NPE podcast. That's patreon.com/NPE podcast. And I hope you'll join our Patreon page. And also, I want to encourage you to think about this. This is what we're doing as this is really coming together. And I'm thinking about the plan of what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring first century Christianity into the 21st century. How do we live it out well? Not what we've seen inside the buildings that many of us have had to walk out from. And I call it the unconventional spiritual life. And here's some of the ways that we participate in this in community today. On Wednesdays, we have a spiritual mindfulness moment. That's at 7 a.m. on 7 a.m. Pacific. That's a time of contemplative prayer together and encouragement for one another. You don't have to write all these down either. You can just get all this info in my bio or on my website, pastor-paul.com. On Thursday, we release our unconventional podcast and Uncon Pod. And I have such a great conversation this week with a pastor named Josh Evans, who's with the I'm Effed Up podcast. And he doesn't say effed up, he drops the full F bomb. He talks about his mental health struggles and why mental health should matter to us in the church. Then on Saturday, you're here today, Pastor Paul's Bible Talk gets released. Then on Sunday, we have an online church service, if you will. We call it the Sunday Community, and you can join us online in Zoom or on streaming on TikTok or YouTube. And then Tuesday, coming up soon, we're going to start having Unconventional Talk, where you can join me in a Zoom room and we'll have a discussion group about the Bible Talk and Sunday Community topics of the week. And so if you're looking for a way to walk out your spiritual life, even though you've had to leave your faith community behind, come join me, Pastor Paul, for the unconventional spiritual life. And it looks like this throughout the week. Love you guys. Hope you'll join me for all of those things coming soon. All right, so now let's talk about, is our God too small? And I have the belief that many people, particularly Christians and evangelical Christians, are worshiping a God that's too small, small g, not the actual God, but a small God that is man-created. And last week, we talked a little bit about this with Abraham and the covenant he had with God, that God wanted to walk in partnership with a man. And he ended up having a conversation. And again, I talk about God in a patriarchal term because that's my history, but you can see God as you like. But this God of heaven called this man named Abram, whose name was later changed to Abraham, and said, leave the land of your fathers and go where I'm going to take you. And just Abram's belief that there is something out there that's drawing me to something good and better than I am, we learned was credited to him as righteousness or salvation, that God wanted to walk in partnership with him. And they made this covenant together. And through that covenant, God says, all the penalty of anything you could ever do wrong in this agreement together, Abraham, I take upon myself and say it's all wiped clean and you cannot disappoint me with sin. We're just going to walk in relationship with you and me and with humanity, and we're going to figure it out as we go together. And because of that, Abraham left his home and followed God's voice. Righteousness did not come to Abraham because he did that. He left because of what God did for him and the partnership he had with God. Do you see the difference of that? It's not that Abraham believed God and so he became righteous, but Abram believed there was this good spirit of God out there. And because of that, he left and went, and that all became righteousness for him. So what I'm going to show you in looking in our Bible passage today is that Christianity, let me have a drink before I cough here, is a relationship with God that comes out of knowing his goodness and starting to see our life change to live the life that was modeled by Jesus, not this idea that somehow we say the sinner's prayer and we become a part of this one true religion. Everybody else is horrible and we're going to go to heaven And we're supposed to treat people well and do better and be a better person. But at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. Heaven is going to be determined on whether you said that prayer and joined a particular religion or not. And I'm saying, no, that's not the story of the Bible. That's not the story of God and not the story of Jesus. It's something very different, that the atmosphere has already been changed, and we don't have to purchase our salvation through a prayer, but that salvation, that sozo, that reconciling between heaven and humanity has already occurred. And because of that, we can go and walk in righteousness. It's kind of like the atmosphere of a room being changed by the air conditioning and saying, well, you have to worship the air conditioning for it to actually affect you. And somebody saying, well, wait, the air conditioning is already affecting me. What are you telling me I have to do that? And let me show you a video I did on that subject of worshiping the air conditioning. And maybe it'll give you a little bit of a feel of what I'm talking about in this concept. So this is my modern day parable called Worshiping the AC.
Worshipping the air conditioning, a modern day parable. On a hot day, two men were enjoying the cool of the room, and the first man told the second, "This air conditioning is an amazing thing. It's a free gift that you have to accept." "What do you mean?" said the second man. "Accept it? The air has already changed. How do I accept it?" The first man explained how his sacred book said if you didn't pray the special prayer to accept the gift of the AC, you would still be hot in the room. But the first man was flabbergasted when his friend said, "Not only am I not hot right now, I am freezing and need a sweater." "You only believe you're cool," said the first man. "False air conditioning teachers have told you it's okay to be cool without praying the special prayer." But the second man argued the AC had already changed the temperature of the air. How could he not be influenced by that coolness? And argued that air temperature was available to everybody in the room. The first man huffed away, angry that his friend hadn't accepted the free gift of his religion.
And that's the modern day parable of worshiping the air conditioning. And do you see the point that I'm talking about there? Is, do we have to worship the air conditioning to enjoy the change of the temperature of the room? Or do we just have to start to understand, like, oh, I can operate in the room because it's cool in here already. I don't need to do anything else to cool myself down because the atmosphere has already been changed. That's the difference of the idea of, like, what somebody will tell you, grace is absolutely free from God. It's absolutely free. Sin just was put on you. There's nothing you could do about it. But this free gift of salvation, you have to accept it. You have to grab onto it. You have to worship the giver of it, or else it doesn't affect you. You're still a sinner and you're still a horrible person out there. And I say, well, how can I grab onto something that's already been given, something that's already been won? What can I add to that? And let me show you a little bit of where I see that in the actual Bible as we do our Bible talk today. Bless our time of reading together of the Bible today as we get ready to go down the home stretch of today's Bible talk. We're going to go to Galatians chapter 3, and oh, foolish Galatians. Now, as we're looking at the Bible here, I want you to note we're reading from one of the, what we call the Pauline letters. They're letters that were written by the Apostle Paul, or we imagine that they were written by the Apostle Paul. They probably weren't all. And let me tell you how I read the works of Paul. Most of these are letters written to particular people in particular cultures for a particular purpose. They weren't written as theology most of the time. Paul would receive questions from people. What do we do about this guy? He's doing this. And Paul would write back and say, I'll tell you what, because you live in Corinth, you need to do this because of the culture around it. He wasn't writing all-time theology for all the rest of history. He was saying, for this instance, with this person, do this. And we have to be very careful that we don't take things that were meant for a group of people in a particular culture and say, well, that's truth for all of eternity, or we'll start doing stupid things like telling women they can't be preachers and pastors and leaders in our church and in our civic culture. So don't do that. But when you see these letters talking about theology and really deep theological concepts, and particularly in the book of Romans that Paul wrote, which I think theology-wise is one of the most important things. We can read that as something for all time. And so I think this passage that we're going to read is theological. One other rule about Paul: if Paul and Jesus ever disagree in what the Bible says about them, Jesus always wins. Jesus always wins. Jesus was the perfect representation of God. He was the model of how we're supposed to live. We call ourselves Christians, not Paulians. And so Jesus always wins. And if Paul seems to contradict Jesus, go with Jesus. All right. Now, having said that, let me read from a Pauline letter of Galatians. Galatians, and it says, "Oh, foolish Galatians, who bewitched you?" I love that line. "It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified. And let me ask you only this: did you receive the Spirit by the works of law or by hearing with faith? Are you so foolish? Having begun by the Spirit, are you now perfected by the flesh? Did you suffer so many things in vain, if indeed it was in vain? Does he who supplies the Spirit to you and works miracles among you do so by the works of the law or by hearing with faith? Just as Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness," just as I was talking about Abraham in that covenant before, "know then that it is those of faith who are the sons of Abraham." And this was a really jarring thing for Paul to say, and I'll tell you more why. "And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, preached the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, 'In you shall all nations be blessed.'" That's not just people who follow God and the religion of Abraham passed down to Christians, but all nations will be blessed. And so then those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham, the man of faith. And now look at this, verse 3:10. "For all who rely on works of the law are under a curse, for it is written, 'Cursed be everyone who does not abide by all things written in the book of the law and do them.' Now it is evident that no one is justified before God by the law, for the righteous shall live by faith, but the law is not of faith. Rather, the one who does them shall live by them. And Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, 'Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree,' so that in Christ Jesus the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles," that's you and me, our non-Jewish friends out there, "so that we might receive the promised Spirit through faith." And bless that word of God. That's beautiful. So what is being said here in a very complex, complicated way? Well, to start with, Paul is saying this: who bewitched you? What the heck happened to you? He's saying, I came down there and I taught you kind of who Jesus was in this gospel thing, and all of a sudden here you are doing something else crazy. And what had happened that was making Paul say this is people had come around and started saying only Jews can be Christians, and Christian Jews follow the Jewish law. And so then they said, okay, well, Gentiles can become Christians, but they have to follow Jewish rules if they do. So they're going to have to be circumcised, and they're going to have to follow these 600 laws that God gave us a long time ago. And Paul is saying, you idiots. You know, when he's saying, who bewitched you, you foolish Galatians, he's saying, you who know better, but have gone back to doing something that you know better than to do. He said, who has bewitched you? Who gave you this evil eye and swayed you to go back to religion? I have people call me false teacher all the time because they say I'm too grace-filled. I love sinners way too much. And let me tell you, false teachers are not people who love sinners way too much. False teachers of the Bible are what Paul's talking about here. They're people who said, no, it's not about Christ. It's about following rules. And I would say evangelicals today are the ones that are saying, no, it's not about grace. It's about not having an abortion. It's about being anti-abortion. It's about being anti-gay marriage. It's about not being gay. Like they're the ones that are bewitching people with rules and laws. And this passage literally says, if you're being asked to live by rules, you are under a curse. It is a curse that Jesus hated to tell people, no, you have to follow our rules and join our faith. And our faith is the exclusive right one. We are putting ourselves and others under a curse, because what did it say? If you obey the law, then you have to obey all the law, or you live by faith. There's two kinds of people in the world: those that live by faith, who believe God, or those who are under the curse of the law. And I would argue that evangelicals today have given in to being bewitched by the idea of like, yeah, but it sure seems like we're supposed to follow the rules. And it sure seems like we have to do this ritual of praying this prayer. And it sure seems like we have to isolate ourselves as our religion being the only one. And they've been bewitched by this human condition of, let's put rules so that if we follow them, God has to respond and give us what we want. God has to defeat our enemies because we're following his rules. And God's saying, that was never my plan. That is a curse you guys put yourself under. And Jesus ended that curse, not by being put on the cross and having the hell beaten out of him by God, but by willingly becoming a curse on the crucifixion tree to model what it looks like to live self-sacrificially for people. If Christians tell you, no, you have to follow rules, don't drink, don't chew, and don't date girls that do, they are trying to put a curse on you, and you tell them, hell no, I won't go and be under the curse. But the opposite of that is to live by faith. 3 times in the New Testament, we see this passage that's quoted here in Galatians 3 that says, the just shall live by faith. That's a line from the book of Habakkuk, the prophet in the Old Testament. And it's quoted 3 times in the New Testament because not following the rules, but living by faith was really important to God. And I hear the wheels turning in your heads right now. You're like, but yeah, but what, the 10 commandments are good, right? And I'm saying, no. God is saying, let's live in partnership together like I did with Abraham. That's my goal. Not that you have to follow a set of rules. Because, by the way, the rules are man-made, and the rules are putting you under a curse, and the rules are there so you can manipulate heaven. You can manipulate the supernatural. It's really like, some would say, witchcraft. And I have some friends out there who are witches, and they would say witchcraft isn't bad. But for my Christian friends who would say witchcraft is evil, I say you're doing witchcraft when you say, if I do these things, then God has to respond this way. That is manipulating the supernatural to manipulate the natural. And wouldn't that be the same as what any person doing an incantation is trying to do? But if we live by faith, we're saying, I'm not going to have the rules to fall back on and say, yeah, but I didn't break that rule, God, so you have to do something good to me. No, instead it says, I have to really trust God, and I have to live self-sacrificially for the common good of people around me so that they will do the same for me. And the idea of, if we live self-sacrificially enough in the world and it starts to spread, like the Christians that fought exposure with goodness rather than with putting up signs and protesting at the local dump heap, or a country that says we're not going to rely on our military to make us great again, but rather our ability to love people and reach out with love and service, maybe we start to see something amazing happen when we live by faith rather than by earning God's favor with our power and our righteousness and our military. Galatians 3 says, if you live by the law, you have to follow all of it. I tell people this all the time, and they come up with all these little cherry picking things that evangelicals do. But I'm saying, if you want to hold the 10 commandments over my head, then I can come and say, have you ever eaten shrimp lately? Have you ever done many of the other 600 rules that are there? And they'll say, oh no, those are, there's different ways to know which ones you have to do or not. No, you're cherry picking the Bible, because Galatians here says, if you follow one of the laws, you have to follow all of them, their laws, my friend. And so don't come calling me a cherry picker of the Bible when in fact that's what Christians are doing with the Old Testament. Did you see this week that Texas passed this anti-abortion law? And I think it's horrifying, but I found it humorous in my idea that God just threw 600 laws on the Israelites to show them what a bad idea living under the law is. Did you see that when Texas passed this horrific anti-abortion bill in Texas, they passed a whole bunch of new laws along with it. And did you see how many it was? 666 laws. Hmm. Could it be Satan is in charge of Texas, or perhaps the Antichrist? 666 laws. Sorry, I just had to pause for that little bitty funny. I'm going to put up on screen a way that you can help support this ministry. We don't take up offering, and we don't ask sponsors to minister, to give us donations like missionaries do. I offer subscriptions under my Patreon page, and here's how you can join. And I'm going to leave it up for a while I continue on to finish up the word here, and we'll finish very shortly. If you point your camera at the top QR code there, it'll take you to my Venmo page, and you can just make a donation. Or for $5.99 a month, you heard the ad about the Patreon page earlier. Point your camera at that Patreon logo there. If you're listening to this in audio, you can go to pastor-paul.com and be a subscriber to help support this ministry. I'd love to get 300 subscribers at $5.99 a month. It's not a lot. It's like a Starbucks coffee a month to help support this work of Pastor Paul and to spread the message that God is not mad at you. A quick drink for me. And let's go down the home stretch of our Bible talk from Galatians 3. So what am I saying? Am I saying that the air conditioner has changed the air conditioning in the room, and the room is the world, and so therefore all of us are going to heaven because AC has changed? Well, I'm not really a believer in heaven as this final eternal resting place with mansions and streets of gold. Heaven is another concept, which I'm not going to go into deeply now. But I would say this is what I believe. That in the movie and the book, The Shack, there's this great line that says, "Do all roads lead to heaven?" And the answer is no. All roads don't lead to heaven, but God will go down any road to find anybody that has a heart for God and for the goodness of heaven. Life is about living in partnership with heaven, not about finding out heaven's rules and finding out how close we can get to skirting them and still hold God into account to give us his favor. We human beings have made this into a religious contest where God likes us better than them. And that is a very human condition. We, of course, like it a lot because we can manipulate that and try to make ourselves look good and feel good. But that's totally a human construct. That's not a religion that God gave us. So what does it all mean? What does it all mean if it's not about praying a sinner's prayer and joining a religious sect anymore, but being in partnership with God? It means this on the really good side of things. It means that I don't have to convert my neighbors to Christianity, and I don't have to fear that my friends are going to hell, and I don't have to tell my gay friends they're going to hell or that I disagree with their lifestyle. And I never, ever, ever have to be racked with shame again. That's what this beautiful story is telling us, that all of the sin nature of humanity, as we're told in the original sin theology, which I don't necessarily buy into, but it's all been taken care of by the goodness of this Spirit that is over all the world. And it's changed the atmosphere, and I don't have to do anything other than just go, wow, isn't this a beautiful atmosphere in this room? Just like when the air conditioning cools it down. Now, what's the bad news in all of that? The bad news is now I don't get to live in relationship with rules. I have to live in relationship with humanity. That means human beings who look like me and human beings who don't. Because we see the bad side of that, where Jonah said, God, I don't want you to have mercy on my enemies. I'd rather be dead than live in a world where you have mercy on those people. We see James and John saying, Jesus, those people in that village who are of a different race and religion than us and nationality, they rejected you. So we want to call down fire from heaven to destroy them. And Jesus said, stop it. The Bible says he rebuked them heavily. You don't know the spirit you're partnered with right now, but I can tell you it's not one from heaven. We see it that Peter didn't want to go to the Roman centurion's house and pray with him because he didn't want Gentiles to have access to the faith that he had. He wanted his faith to continue to be exclusive from the rest of the world and be able to wrap it into his race and his nationality and say, God, I'm doing what's right. Make Israel great again for me so we will again be the economic and military power of the world. Those are human religious conditions that make us say we must get revenge on our enemies. But when we start to say, no, it's about relationship, we start to say, what can happen if I live differently in relationship with those around me? And now I'm required to love my enemies, to love people who disagree with me. If I'm an extreme anti-abortionist, I have to love and listen to people on the other side of that discussion. And I don't get to call them baby killers anymore because Jesus said if I did that, I would be the one worthy of hellfire. It's not about praying a sinner's prayer and joining a community that's enclosed and in an echo chamber. It's about believing there's something bigger out there. There's a God that's big enough to make me be drawn to my best self, to not only love my friends, but to love my enemies. And that through that, the world can be changed. Through that vision of self-sacrifice of me, the world can be changed. Human beings want the rules. We want to be able to say, I attained my righteousness and you didn't, so I'm better than you, and therefore I have permission to treat you horribly. And we miss the story of Jesus. Let's not be foolish Galatians, being bewitched back into circumcision and rules and law to get favor with God and favor with one another. Let's spend our time saying, how can we work towards the common good so that someday we get to beat our swords into plowshares, that our resources as a country and a culture will go into profiting humanity rather than finding new ways to destroy it. What do you think? Could it be possible that the world that looks like Jesus would be the better world? So I bless this word. I just wash away anything that is from me and not from heaven. And I just say to you, you are good because God is good and the goodness of heaven is coming to earth so it can be on earth as it is in heaven, and walk with that. Don't forget, tomorrow morning, Sunday morning, if you're watching this live on Saturday, we will have our Sunday community, and part of our spiritual life walk with the unconventional spiritual life. And it looks something like this: spiritual mindfulness on Wednesday, the Uncon Pod, the unconventional podcast with unconventional conversations on Thursday, Pastor Paul's Bible Talk on Saturday, Sunday community, our online church on Sunday, and our unconventional talk discussion groups on Tuesday. You can find out more information on my website at pastor-paul.com, or if you're watching this on TikTok or YouTube, click on the link tree in my bio and it'll take you to all the information. And if none of that works, send me a DM through TikTok or YouTube or through my website, pastor-paul.com, and we'll figure it out together. Don't let the bastards who ran you from the church run you from your spirituality and your faith. It doesn't have to look like mine at all. I'm not demanding that, but I'm saying if there is something of a belief of the divine of heaven, you don't have to leave that behind as you're deconstructing in this time of move and change in the world. Sunday community is tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Pacific. I hope to see you there, and I hope to see you again soon through all of the unconventional spiritual life of Pastor Paul. Have a great day. We'll see you again.